After listening carefully, we've decided the best way to proceed is with one inquiry, but in two parts.
The Leveson Inquiry into Press Standards was commissioned by David Cameron in July 2011 and began hearing evidence in September of that year. Over a period of many months, the inquiry sat for 86 days, hearing evidence from 650 witnesses, either in person or through written statements. Witnesses included celebrities, politicians, journalists, editors and proprietors, as well as some high-profile members of the public considered to be victims of the press.
And I rang her phone.
Yes.
And it clicked through onto her voicemail, so I heard her voice.
Yes.
And it was just like I jumped. She's picked up her voicemails, Bob. She's alive. And I was just, it was then, really.
The scale and ambition of the Leveson Inquiry helped produce some extraordinary moments. There was tension, humour.
The President's wife in France, without any closing.
It's a little early for that, Mr. McMullan.
High drama and periods of emotional intensity.
The man is a war criminal!
Lord Justice Leveson and his chief attack dog, Robert J. QC, emerged as a formidable double act. Their dry, candid demeanour was punctuated by long, sometimes uncomfortable silences, creating a challenging atmosphere for even the most self-assured operators.
I also have to say that I failed.
Well, that may be, and I recognise...
I'm very sorry about it.
The first witnesses were called, and the inquiry began with a moving appearance from Bob and Sally Dowler. That was quickly followed by Hugh Grant, who made bold claims about phone hacking, and soon enough, a small circle of high-profile flag wavers, who had previously felt either unwilling or were without a platform, emerged with stories of betrayal, harassment, or elaborate invasions of their privacy.
I felt such a sense of invasion that my daughter's bag... it's very difficult to say how angry and how angry I felt that my 5-year-old daughter's school was no longer a place of, complete security from journalists.
While the famous names fill the majority of the column inches, many of the most shocking stories came from the families of the bereaved and members of the public thrust brutally into the spotlight. Stories of bribery and bullying emerged that created an image of a tabloid press as at times a rabid, immoral machine where anyone was fair game.
I'd written these words and thoughts at the most desperate time in my life. Most people won't have to experience that. And it was my only way of communicating with Madeline. And for me, there was absolutely no respect shown for me as a grieving mother or as a human being, or for my daughter. And it made me feel very vulnerable and small.
Throughout the inquiry, tabloid journalists and editors defended their profession by displaying a sense of cornered aggression. Some mistakes were conceded, but there was never a unified or wholly convincing sense of remorse. Spectators were left with the indelible impression that the cut-and-thrust environment of the newsroom floor runs deep in the veins of those who have inhabited it.
Did you know that was unethical?
Not unethical, no.
Why not?
It doesn't necessarily follow that listening to somebody speaking to somebody else is unethical.
You accept, though, that was his basis, that was his honest basis for inferring that there may have been...
I think Mr. Grant
some
was obsessed by trying to drag the Daily Mail into another newspaper's scandal, and that his strategy was to try to do that.
Whoever was giving evidence, in whichever strand of the inquiry was being pursued, the role of the Press Complaints Commission and its failure to restrain was central. Many already considered the PCC a dead organisation, its authority destroyed by the hundreds of allegations of events that it failed to police. But the battle lines remained squarely drawn, with the freedom of the press on one side and the need to protect society from their abuses on the other.
I think that the history of the PCC's performance undermines the whole concept of self-regulation. And rereading this evidence, because you sent it to me at the end of last week, I noticed that I was speaking up for self-regulation. But I wouldn't anymore. I don't think this is an industry that is interested in or capable of self-regulation.
It was an inquiry that also uncovered some important new information, including the now infamous 163 pages of emails written by Fred Michel, a lobbyist working for James Murdoch. He'd been writing to the Culture Secretary's special advisor. Did it show a back channel by which the Murdochs are trying to influence the progress of their bid for B-Sky B? Jeremy Hunt's advisor quit, but the minister himself survived.
So if we move the time forward an hour, I think it's clear you wouldn't have sent that text message to Mr. Murdoch after you had formally acquired responsibility. Is that correct?
Yes.
Ultimately, a decision on how to respond to the judge will come down to the Prime Minister. Some say, though, he was already compromised, as the inquiry showed how close he was to News International.
Occasionally he would sign them off, LOL, lots of love. Actually, until I told him it meant laugh out loud, and then he didn't sign them like that anymore.
But he remains the man with the power to decide what happens next, and he has already signalled who he intends to listen to.
Why are we all here? We're here because of the truly dreadful things that happened, not to politicians, but to ordinary members of the public whose lives have been turned upside down when they've already suffered through losing their children, and then have their lives turned upside down in a totally unacceptable way. And, you know, this is a sort of, I think, a cathartic moment where press, politicians, police, all the relationships that haven't been right, we have a chance to reset them, and that is what we must do.
Can this inquiry create a serious and permanent shift in press behaviour? The arguments for and against regulation are finely balanced, and Leveson's report will never be able to satisfy everybody. If he recommends statutory regulation, he will be accused of damaging press freedom. If he proposes a beefed-up regulator, he will be accused of weakness in some quarters. Wherever he draws a line, one thing is certain though. Lord Justice Leveson is determined to make an impact, stating on several occasions that he is not prepared to allow his inquiry to become a footnote in the annals of press history. With the money thrown at it, expected to total nearly £6 million, as well as the scale or the breadth of the undertaking and the coverage it has received, that seems hardly likely.